The following program is suitable for general audience of any age.
Tonight, we discuss the legal landscape of vehicle ownership. What pieces of legislature are relevant in determining the legal status of a vehicle in Sri Lanka? A very good evening. You're joining us on Law, Land and Liberty here on Other Derana News channel, where we bring to you key legal concepts and break it down for the layman. Tonight's topic is something that affects every one of us that is a pedestrian or an owner of a motor vehicle in the country, and that's regarding the legal ownership or the legal status of a vehicle and the ownership of such. To speak about this, we have someone that is not a new face on this program, and we're glad to have him back on the show after quite some time as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Dr. Udara Soyza. Actually, I should reiterate, attorney at law. Doctor, thank you so much for coming back to the studio after quite some time to actually help us understand this very vast subject as well as a layman.
Thank you.
A little bit of an introduction into the program in itself. We're going to be getting into the fundamentals specifically relating to what the law relates when it comes to the legal ownership and the status of a vehicle. Next, we'll be getting into the current context as well on what we see right now on the ground and practical examples from doctor's point of view as well. And finally, we'll be getting into fundamental future reforms that maybe we could expect to see in the years to come, and what exactly the lapses are and how it should be identified and approached moving forward.
Hello, my name is Arjuna and I'm an undergraduate from the field of data science. My question is on the fundamentals. What laws govern automobiles in Sri Lanka?
And without any further ado, let's get right into this discussion. Doctor, thank you once again for your participation on this program. This is an area of concern and a lot of interest for the layman, specifically everybody that we do know owns some sort of motor vehicle. So there is that confusion about what exactly the concern is when it comes to the legal status of a vehicle. Should it not be guaranteed outright when we buy it? Can you please explain to us exactly what it means to understand the legal status of a vehicle in Sri Lanka? What does it mean in Sri Lanka's context, sir?
Yeah, it's quite a broad concept. However, basically for a layman term, you need to understand several elements when you are buying a vehicle and subsequently registering. First thing is make sure that when you buy a vehicle, it's registered in the RMV, right? So one thing is should be registered vehicle. Also, there should be proper documentation. Also, lawfully imported, right? So there are some vehicles that we will discuss that are illegally bought to Sri Lanka, right? So these would be illegal vehicles, which we'll discuss in a bit. And also you have to have this one, a very important point. You have to have a legal chassis number, right? And the chassis, the vehicle number, you cannot play with these numbers, right? You cannot touch the chassis. There are legal cases on this as well. So the chassis has to be untainted. And finally, this vehicle should comply with the Motor Vehicle Act. I think recently we saw certain initiatives by the government to ensure that these certain illegal different decorations and decals in vehicles to be removed, etc. So this would be like if your vehicle has certain illegal decoration, this could also potentially make you legally liable for some damages that could happen due to that. So a lot of different aspects that we have to discuss, from importing to registering to documentation to the actual physical chassis and its decoration realities.
Yes, Doctor, I think you said it exactly as I would want to explain moving forward as well, specifically relating to the laws that are present in Sri Lanka when it comes to the ownership of a motor vehicle. Can you please help us understand what exactly the process looks like when it comes to legally registering a vehicle in Sri Lanka? You mentioned that there are some key documents that need to be produced as well. What does it look like at the moment?
Sure. First, I will give you the basics about the relevant statutes. In trying to understand, yes, we will come to the MT6 and different documentations later, but we have to understand the different statutes and the guidelines, right? The guidelines which are there in order to regulate the whole process. First thing is, we know that the Motor Traffic, MTA Motor Traffic Act. Also, you need to understand about, people don't understand the custom ordinance as well, right? So if your vehicle is a luxury category vehicle, etc., whether the certain, there are different categories of tax, additional tax you need to pay. Also, you need to understand Import and Export Control Acts, and also Finance Act, ultimately Penal Code if you do any modifications, fraud, etc. Okay, so you need to understand that the vehicles are governed by a combination of these documents from, as I told, Motor Traffic Act to Custom to Penal Code to different other statutes. So what key documents you would require? You would need the normal MT6 form, and also now you require this no objection letter from the seller. For example, if I buy a vehicle from you, I need to get you to give me a no objection letter for this vehicle to be registered under my name. So when I give my MT6 with my identity confirmed, with my photograph certified by JP or a attorney at law, the signatures has to match. For example, if your no objection letter has a specific signature and the MT6 has another signature, we are having problems, and there are specific time frame which we'll discuss. You cannot wait for 3-4 years to register the vehicle after buying. So within a specific time frame, you have to register the vehicle. MT6 forms important. Again, MT8 is also there, but most importantly, MT6 and the no objection letter. Together with, you should take copies of the identity documents, right? So make sure that this is not fraudulently stolen, etc. Identity card information, etc. And the photograph, again, certified photograph from attorney at law or a Justice of Peace.
A very curious question relating to the statutes as well before we move along with the process. Doctor, as you mentioned, there are multiple statutes and key pieces of legislature that work in tandem to ensure the legal registration and ownership of a vehicle occurs in Sri Lanka. Is it a cohesive process, or what does it look like for an individual that is registering when it comes to overlappings of the law? Are there lapses due to the fact that there are multiple pieces of legislature that are active when governing the status and ownership of a vehicle?
Not necessarily. You have to understand there are two types of vehicle registration. One would be the initial registration, and other would be a subsequent registration. I will give the examples of how both of this work. Suppose you are bringing down a vehicle from, let's say Japan. You are going for a first registration. So for that you need documents like Form A, you have the custom clearance document, and you have to have the chassis inspection by the DMT and the road worthiness, etc. So all of that document has to be there, and the subsequent allocation of the number plate. What I discussed earlier with MT6, etc. is a subsequent registration. For example, if I buy a used car or a second-hand car from a seller. So there are two processes. Of course, the first process in terms of a first registration is more complex, but not exactly complex if you have the real documents. Secondly, the second process is rather simple, right? You just need to have the documentation, and there are two ways you can do it, the one-day service and the normal day service. In my opinion, I think the process of registering vehicles and the law governing the process is quite simplified. Over the years, it has evolved, and now for the last 10-15 years, the process is simple. But there are other issues that I would like to bring up in terms of illegal vehicles, etc., which is very interesting. But in terms of its initial or its subsequent registration, the law is very clear.
So what I'm understanding is there is a streamlined process. It's just that there are certain lapses where vulnerabilities are exposed and they're abused maybe by malicious circumstances. I want to get to those specifics relating to how exactly the acts that we have in place help regulate vehicle ownership when it comes to maybe not just initial registrations and subsequent registrations, registration transfers, and also other related acts, especially when it comes to the issuance of number plates as well. How exactly does the Motor Traffic Act govern these kinds of functions? Is it already overarching? Is it only the Motor Traffic Act that we have to look to when it comes to situations like
Yes, I would say 80% Motor Traffic Act. The Motor Traffic Act is what determines the circumstances of where, for example, where the government could just refuse to register your vehicle, or they could seize your vehicle, right? However, there are other provisions such as the custom ordinance, etc. Again, if you do not pay your custom duties and if you bring this vehicle illegally, then this would be something that we say as a illegal vehicle. Or if you taint with the chassis number. Now we see with some individuals, they do not, bring the vehicle in a legal manner. So they bring the vehicle maybe in some kind of a fraudulent container. Then what they will do is they will take maybe from a older vehicle or older model, etc. They will take a book, a CR, right? A CR, and then certificate registration, and then they will try to clone these or add these new chassis, right? The CR chassis into the new chassis. And these kind of frauds are very common in Sri Lanka. The reason is because with the custom ordinance, the customs 300%, 200%, 400% custom duties apply for these vehicles. So because of this unbearable amount of custom duties, people tend to bring vehicles in unauthorized manner. I think we saw with a lot of politicians or several politicians being arrested in the recent time, I think earlier this year and some point of last year for this kind of vehicle issues. And we should get to that at some point. But in terms of its governance, Motor Traffic Act is what you really need to look at. But if you want to look deeper in terms of how the customs work, etc., and how the documentation, yes, penal code is there, forgery is illegal under penal code, that also applies. But anybody who wants to study or learn about this aspect, my starting point and the ending point would be the overarching Motor Traffic Act.
Exactly, and apart from the Motor Traffic Act as well, what you just mentioned was very important, Doctor, relating to the illegal registration of certain chassis and the circulation of such. Can you please explain to us or help us understand, with your experience in the field, what kind of vehicles have you seen the most be succumbing to such illegal activity? Specifically, is it normal, suburban utility vehicles? What kind of classifications do you see that come under these kinds of forgery attempts, specifically not just a certificate of registration, but maybe there could be duplication of chassis as well? What do you see in that context?
I'll come to that in like 1 second. I want to add a little bit to the key provisions that you asked me earlier. Like now, for example, yes, Section 47 that I was about to say, Section 47, it says, of the Motor Traffic Act says, registration is mandatory before use. You cannot use a vehicle without a registration, right? Also, 47A, 47B, this is a very key provision that all these audience must remember, is after buying, within 14 days, you have to register, otherwise 100 rupee fine per day, right? Also, 49, lawfulness use of number plate. That means you can't interchange your number plate. Let's say you cannot like use one number plate on another vehicle. Any illegal or unregistered vehicle without a warrant, the police can seize, right, for investigation. And Section 244, that's 240. 244 is where alterations to chassis engine must be approved. Now, we know that clear provisions of Motor Traffic Act controls the regulation of this vehicle. So, in this context, any vehicle that is contravening to these realities would be a illegal vehicle. So I have several types of illegal vehicles that I want to discuss, right? One is the clone vehicle. What is a clone vehicle? That means the vehicle, two vehicles will have the same chassis. For example, I realize your chassis is, let's say 1, 2, 3, ABC, 1, 1. I'll use the same chassis in my vehicle also. How do I do that? Basically, my vehicle is illegal vehicle. I use a grinder to grind the real chassis, and I will get some Bas fellow to insert the chassis of yours to my vehicle. So now we have two vehicles with the same chassis number. Right? This would be a clone vehicle. Or sometimes your vehicle is now got into accident. This cannot be found. Right? What I do is I take your chassis number and your book and I run another vehicle with your chassis. Secondly, illegal assemble, right? So basically now you know that any modification, any major modification has to be approved through the RMV, right? Now, even engine modification, right? So some vehicles you see, especially vehicles like Defender, for example. You have seen certain like Series 3 vehicles, now they make into the modern Defenders with all modern facelifts, etc. This is illegal. If you are changing anything that goes against the weight, right, the wheelbase, the whatever the diameters, etc., you need to get the approval, the prior approval before doing that. So any vehicle that contravenes the original manufacturer's guidelines would be illegal. This would be something that we say illegally assembled vehicle. And also custom operated vehicles, again connected to this what we are discussing, right? I bring a vehicle without custom approval. What do I do? I take another vehicle that is condemned or old. I put the parts like chassis, etc., and I run the vehicle with the old number plate. But you are actually driving a brand new vehicle with the old registration. And there are this very illegal, dangerous illegal type of vehicles called cut and join vehicles. So sometimes they will bring, two parts, right? And they will weld the vehicle together. And this would be why would a cut and joint vehicle would be illegal? Because in any accident, the vehicle will separate into two parts and people will die, perhaps, right? So any cut and join vehicles would be illegal because, two chassis welded together. Totally illegal. I think most interesting category here is the registration of forged documents, fake CR and forged seals, etc. So now this is typically where people make fake documentations, but now this faking has become so prevalent to a point that I would like to discuss it in details, where you can't tell it's fake. Because when you go to the RMV database and when you check it, they actually have the vehicle. So it's the computer system is almost hacked with the help of the so-called insiders. So you do your due diligence, you check with your contact or with your search at RMV, the vehicle seems good, you buy the vehicle. Later you realize, okay, this vehicle is not what it is. Now there were cases that I've seen, because certain tractors, etc., which had like these G numbers, GR, GA numbers. And these luxury vehicles also had GA numbers. So what do people do? They take a tractor, which is maybe like 500,000 or 200,000 rupees. So they take the book of the tractor, right? So what they do is they work with these rogue elements inside the RMV. They hack this book, right? So let's say it's a tractor book. So they will hack this tractor book entry and remove whatever the tractor or whatever these landmaster entries in the database, and they will put a Prado or some kind of a luxury vehicle. Now, then they will illegally bring a vehicle, right, with that information, or they can also put whatever the vehicle information that they have. And now we are having a Prado running with a tractor license plate. So now you are spending, let's say, you are spending 20 million on an illegal vehicle, because you check, of course, you're not going to buy a 20, 30 million luxury vehicle without checking. So when you check, in fact, your vehicle was registered and now you have an official book from the RMV as well.
I want to get into the red flags that consumers should be looking out for as well. As you mentioned, now it's very hard to tell if there's a forgery taking place, if even the authorities that you go to check the validity of also corresponds with the details that you have been given. I want to get to the further specifics on the red flags and the current context that we see when it comes to the tampering of vehicles and the offences related to it. But we do have to go in for a short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty. We'll be right back after this. Stay tuned.
Hello,
My name is Jitma Ranasinghe and I'm a third year law student from General Sir John Kuttalawala Defence University. And my question for today is, on the current context, what does the legal process for owning automobiles look like in Sri Lanka? Thank you.
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty on Other Than a News channel. We're in conversation with Dr. Udara Soyza, the lecturer in charge for public international law for high diploma students at the Bandaranaga Centre for International Studies. We were just getting done speaking about the fundamentals of the legislation and statutes surrounding the legal ownership of a vehicle and the legal status of an automobile. Doctor, thank you so much for the previous segment. I believe we got as much foundational understanding as possible. Now, I want to touch on a very important point that you mentioned right before we left off for a break, which is relating to the amount of level of fraudulence that we see in the country when it comes to automobiles. It was a very alarming fact that you mentioned, that the fact that we as laymen will go to check the RMB website and then there might not be looking any shallow, certain, related fraudulences that we can see from the public, from the naked eye, but there are certain alarming activities of forgery going around. Can you please help us understand what exactly the key red flags are that we should be looking forward to as consumers that are hoping to purchase vehicles and have a legally owned vehicle in Sri Lanka? What are the biggest points that we should be looking out for?
Good question. I will simplify this in a categorization. So I look at two levels of fraud here, Anuradhi. Simple fraud and advanced fraud. Simple fraudsters are the ones that do fraud in a way that you can catch with a naked eye. We will discuss few things. For example, if you see a new vehicle, right, but then if you see it's a old chassis, right? If you say this vehicle is a 1996 number plate, right, like a 32 dash or 64 or 65, but this looks like a very recent one, you know definitely this has been interchanged. That means they are using a fake or forged chassis. Relatively easier. Or very basic frauds where they make fake Photoshop CR. You can go to the RMB and you can easily find out this is, or you can even use the app and find it out. So this is, I would say, simple fraud. I mean, fraud nevertheless, but a simple fraud. So these ones, or you can, my advice is you always check for everything. Like you go under and check for welding marks, etc. Always look at the chassis. A good easy way for normal people to do this would be go for a valuation. This is what I usually do is 2,000-3,000 rupees, maybe 5,000, still worth the millions you're going to save. So go for a valuation, put your, doesn't matter the company, if it's a reputed valuation company, go and get a valuation for your vehicle. This is a basic way to do this because most people, I would say, majority of the people in Sri Lanka, I wouldn't say would be technically savvy to actually go under chassis to check whether it's been welded or not. Right. So the valuers will check because they are trained, their eyes are trained, and they will check whether, because the way the original manufacturer carve their numbers into the chassis and what our people do is different. But I know there are good places in Sri Lanka where they do the fake forgery chassis carving to the almost to the manufacturer level, but still this you can find. This, all of this I would say simple forgeries because you can find this out, right? Where I think you should really think a bit more like a detective when you try to buy a vehicle is when you have the advanced forgeries, advanced for illegal vehicles. This is where the rogue elements, right, the rogue elements inside the RMV has conspired with the rogue elements outside the RMV, and they are made brand new everything. For example, the chassis, if you look at the chassis is not tainted, right? So they will bring down a vehicle, a 2005 vehicle, but they'll take a three-wheeler book, with a workable number like a G number, etc. What they will do is they will edit. They will, with the RMV computer, the RMV officials will, the rogue elements of RMV, they will edit this computer documentation and they will put all the latest vehicles information into the system. This way, few ways you can figure out. Ask if you're buying a luxury vehicle, check the tail or check the tail. That means check who has bought, who is the initial or the first import of the vehicle. How has the tax been paid? Because if you look at a tractor or a three-wheeler, you don't see this luxury taxes, etc. So if for example, if you're the owner of a luxury vehicle, it's of your interest to preserve all the tax documents from the early owners as well, because this tax tail that you are having shows that this vehicle is authentic, right? So it is better when you buy luxury vehicle. This is, I wouldn't say this would for a normal Toyota Corolla. I think these numbers are difficult to taint with. But for example, if you're buying these, I would say, controversial number plates, like a G number, certain, etc., then what you need to do is go and, or H numbers, because you have H numbers for lorries, you have for cars, you have three-wheelers, you have for jeeps. You know, this is not a, but if you look at PA number, you have mostly for double cabs, etc., right? So this is why some people prefer to buy a double cab with a P number, but would be worried to buy a G number double cab, because this G number double cab could be a three-wheeler made into a double cab. Not physically, but they take the three-wheeler book, they edit it. So ask for the tax number, check for the first owner, check whether this tax have been paid. So when you're buying a vehicle, a luxury vehicle, check about the luxury taxes. Check who got the vehicle before you. You know, so check, almost like now you better check your vehicles like you're checking a land almost, you know, just like you check the extracts. It's better, especially with luxury vehicles, to find these taxation documents, right? This is the only way you can counter advanced fraud. I think it's rather disappointing, because suppose you paid 30 million rupees, you bought a vehicle, you check the RMV, you bought the vehicle. What if this vehicle is an illegal vehicle? You lose 30 million, you're going to end up in jail as well. So the police will fact report you, right? And police will put in the B report that you are the owner of the vehicle. Now you will be in jail, right? You will be in jail, you have a court case, you lose the 30 million. So your life is, literally your life is ruined because of that.
That's exactly a point that I want to bring up as well when it comes to unknowing actors, when it comes to these kinds of crimes. Before we get into that aspect of what exactly the repercussions are for an individual that was unaware of the fact that they were in possession of an illegally tampered with vehicle, I want to ask you about the offences that we already have stated in our legislature relating to the tampering of vehicles in such an illegal manner. Can you please walk us through some of the offences that have already been listed? Maybe it's in the Motor Traffic Act or elsewhere, maybe with the Customs Ordinance. Where exactly can we...
Motor Traffic Act, right? So you have a, I would list it as we go, but let me first give you a basic offences. You cannot, I think Farooq versus the Queen 1960 judgment clearly said any tampering with chassis is illegal, right? Doesn't matter how neatly it was done, you can't. So the Motor Traffic Act very clearly lists out certain offences which makes it illegal for you to change the engine without permission, to make any manufacturer level modifications like facelift, etc., to even to lift up the vehicle with spacers or different size of shock absorbers, to even have tires which change the wheelbase of the vehicle, and of course don't go even near the chassis, which makes super illegal as well. Change in the color of the vehicle without approval, also illegal. I mean, a lot of people think, it's just a color, I'm just going to change it. No, the book says if it's red, yes. Doing any major modifications that alter the weight, because if you look at your book, CR, you can see the weight is also listed in the book. Also adding additional doors. I have seen some people taking a 2-door vehicle and making a 4-door vehicle. Illegal. I've seen people taking a single cab and they make it a double cab, because when you make any structural changes to the vehicle, that makes your vehicle an illegal vehicle. Even to add seats, if your vehicle is an open vehicle, for you to cover the vehicle, you have to get a permission. If your vehicle is a closed vehicle with a hard top, to remove that hard top and maybe put a convertible or to a soft roof, also you can't do that. You cannot treat your vehicle like a toy that you can play with. Because why? You take this vehicle and you drive it on the road, somebody's life may be in your hand, maybe passenger, maybe a pedestrian, maybe yourself. Right? So in this context, you need to understand you cannot literally do any modifications without a proposal. So you might ask, that is so, what can you do anything with it? Well, yes, for example, you can fit internally, you can maybe fit a radio system, or you can fit maybe some sensors, reverse sensors, etc. Perhaps you can change your, I would say I have seen one case, one scenario where it wasn't held to be legal. You put electric windows for manual shutter. So this kind of minor modifications, or maybe you want to put alloy wheel for iron wheel. So this would be okay, but anything major, even increasing the tire size. Some people I have seen removing their mudguard area and putting massive tires, like monster tires, completely illegal. You can see actually if you look at comparatively in US, for example, where when I lived in US, it was a cultural thing for vehicles to be lifted out. You can do anything to the vehicles, and in US, the inspections are done in a different manner, where they allow, despite the modifications, for to be safe. For example, in US, not a normal person cannot do the modification. You have to go and do the modification with a reputed vehicle garage, and that would have the government approval, and then you can make those changes. But in Sri Lanka, every Tom and Dick makes this modification, makes it very seriously dangerous, thus making it illegal. But in other countries like Australia, mostly in US, I've seen they allow significant amount of modifications to vehicles.
Doctor, the question arises when you mention the long list of areas that is restricted and requires special permission from authorities in order to ensure that we can consider a modification or even move forward. In some instances, as you mentioned, it's a hardline stance, it's not possible. A natural question that arises is, if in the case such modifications have occurred, what kind of penalties apply for individuals that have carried out such modifications, or maybe even the illegal ones, what we thought was legal? What exactly are the repercussions?
From minimum 6 months to considerable time. I think 100,000 to also minimum 100,000. As I think it depends on the seriousness of the modification, right? So of course, you painting or you playing with the chassis would put you in serious trouble than you maybe painting the car in a different color. So I would say seriousness would differ from what modification you do. Also the impact of the modification. My advice is, don't do any modifications without the permission under any circumstances.
That's an ideal point that I want to get into as well, specifically relating to already tampered with vehicles and the illegal importation of vehicles into the country, especially as we've seen a boom of electric vehicle usage among the consumers of Sri Lanka. And also we have to get into the aspects of future reforms and amendments and what we can expect to see as addressings of the lapses of the already existing legislature in Sri Lanka. Before we get into any of those specifics, we're going in for a short commercial break now. This is Law, Land and Liberty. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with the final segment.
Hello, my name is Sithara Gamage and I'm a third-year law student at General Sir John Kotharavala Defence University. My question today is, in the future, how can we expect the law surrounding legal vehicle ownership to change moving forward? Thank you.
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty on Other Derana News Channel. We're in conversation with Dr. Udara Soyza, attorney at law, relating to the legal ownership and the legal status of automobiles in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Doctor, for the previous two segments. I believe we covered as much of the fundamentals and basics as we possibly could. And now, with the limited time that we have left, I want to ask you a question that you had actually pointed out in the immediate segment before this, the previous segment, relating to the ownership of an illegal vehicle. What happens to individuals that may be unknowing or unaware of the fact that they were in possession of such an illegal vehicle with a fraudulent chassis number? When it comes to the courts process, does the vehicle get tampered? Does the vehicle get taken away? What kind of penalties apply? And how exactly does an individual that's unknowing about this entire situation deal with it? Good news and bad news. Good news is, if you can prove that you are an innocent party, ultimately maybe you can get out of the court case without a prison or a major fine. However, the bad news is, irrespectively of your knowledge or not, if a vehicle is illegal, it's almost like a strict liability. If the vehicle is illegal, there's nothing you can do. Anuradha, if the vehicle is illegal, there's nothing to legalize something that is illegal. This vehicle would be seized and never to be seen again, right? So probably this would be auctioned for parts in government auctions, or most probably it will just rot for the remaining time that it has. So unfortunate reality is, whether you knew or not, once a illegal or tampered vehicle gets into the possession of the government, there's no way the court can release it. There's absolutely no way. There's no provision for the court to release it due to your innocence. If the vehicle is then tampered with, per law, the vehicle has to be seized. Nothing can be done. Maybe, you have for example, if I have sold you a illegal vehicle, then our contract would be rescind, void. You can probably sue me for the money's worth or for the consideration. So, or maybe you can sue me for the misrepresentation and you can seek restitution from me as a seller, you as the buyer. But in Sri Lanka, practically, you don't see this as much. You have 2-year time limitation for any civil action. So if I sold it today and you, in 4 or 5 years, you get caught with this, you have really no way of suing me because the statute of limitation 2-year period has gone. So there is no clear-cut way of fixing once you break you break your possession by buying a illegal vehicle. There's nothing that can be done. So you're going to lose the money. You're going to lose a lot of time. You'll lose money for your lawyers. It's a lose-lose situation. So prevention is always better. 100%. Prevention is ideal here, because once you go down the line, sometimes maybe you might end up having illegal vehicle for the rest of your life and may not get caught. But chances are that sometimes RMV is doing checks, etc. But again, for the RMV also, it's not as easy to check, because if some entries are legal entries, illegally made, right? They've been accessed by other officials. This is so unfortunate. I think somebody needs to file a fundamental rights case here, because suppose that I am innocent, I buy a vehicle. The misrepresentation is not only misrepresentation not only seller, it's also the RMV. If the RMV officials, whoever has tampered the RMV databases, then if you are the victim of this kind of a fraud, which is done by some rogue elements of the RMV, then what you should do? You should be able to sue the RMV. Right? There should be some sense of insurance policy, because when there's a registration process, that means the government needs to stand by the registration process. But this kind of accountability and responsibility is not seen in Sri Lankan culture. Maybe this would be the ideal time for that action, where people can sue the RMV for negligent misrepresentation, because they maintain a database that has been tampered
and because of that misrepresentation, you bought it because you did your due diligence by checking the RMV database. They had the fake information. You relied on the fake information. You're not God, right? You're not somebody who has some divine knowledge of when frauds have happened, right? And can't expect everybody to be lawyers and check 20, 30 years of pedigree.
Very important point there as well, Doctor, the mentioning of the fact that we don't exactly know, sometimes it's completely beyond the control if the fraudulence has gone to such an extent where it is unrecognizable and indistinguishable from the actual official records. Relating to the RMV, as you mentioned, do you believe that in recent times have we seen digitization efforts? Has there been some sort of cordoning of the digital websites that have been used? Do we see more vigilance? What are your thoughts?
So for the last 20 odd years, I would say last 20 odd years, the digitalization process has been progressing smoothly. The problem is not the digitalization. The problem is, as you said, the data security. This is in fact a data breaches where there should be a system where every entry is closely guarded. For example, if somebody is entering into the database to do any edit, that person's information should be readily available, because it's so unfair that ultimately this fraud happened due to the negligence of the RMV to guard their own data. If they are unable to guard their own data and we suffer, or our clients suffer because of this lack of safeguarding their own data, what's the point of digitalization? Now, if you look at other countries, it is impossible. In USA, in Canada, in Australia, it is easier to go to the moon and come back than tampering with a government digital database. But in Sri Lanka, if you pay enough, the officials will do it for you. I think now they have arrested some people and things are a bit better, but you only need one person to do this. So short answer, do everything digitally, but safeguard the digital process and ensure the footprints are closely saved. So any fraud, the wrongdoers are accounted for.
And do you believe, Doctor, that with the other state actors as well, the police and other authorities that are required to be vigilant of such illegal activity, in your experience, with your practical experience, has it been vigilant enough? Has there been proper arrests being made? Is there enough search operations that are happening? What do you see on the ground right now, Doctor?
I think compared to maybe 10 years ago, its situation is better. However, as I said, these are highly technical matters and you need perhaps technical forensics to figure out who entered, who used this, who logged in, right? Maybe some biometrics where the person who's entered information is closely covered. I think this is very difficult for the police. Once a fraud actually happens and you have a fraudulently created CR and a vehicle on the road, I think it's very difficult to stop. But low-level fraudulent activities, often the police can catch if they see a new-looking vehicle with an old number plate. One quick thing is, I've seen this certain, I think it's this Isuzu Troopers, for example. So interesting was they had this Isuzu car that had the number plate 32. This was very cheap, back in the day it was maybe 500,000. So what did people do? They discarded the car. They used the Isuzu book, right? And using that Isuzu book, they driving a Isuzu Trooper, that means a Jeep, which is maybe 4 or 5 times expensive. So if you ever talk to a person who has owned and driven or been a fan of Isuzu Troopers, they are very hesitant to buy these vehicles because 75% to 80% vehicles, Isuzu Troopers in the vehicle, the Jeeps in the market, lot of 32 numbers, the book is actually not from the real vehicle, but from a car, right? So you have a Isuzu car, right? But the real vehicle that is running on the road is a Isuzu Trooper. So certain vehicles, I think the police also knows, but I think it's difficult because if you stop all these Isuzu Troopers, nobody will have Isuzu Trooper to drive in the vehicle, but in the road. So practically difficult how many to stop, but action are being taken. So for the audience, what you all need to understand is don't be a victim. There are certain categories of vehicles which are likely to be fraud, like I said, like Isuzu Troopers, etc., and certain other vehicles like strange numbers, like a GK number, a GY number, any number that is shared with land vehicles, right? Always double, triple check.
Exactly. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have, and that's a perfect point for us to unfortunately have to end off on this discussion. Doctor, thank you so much for coming to the studio and to helping us understand as viewers exactly what we should be looking out for when it comes to the purchasing and the legal status of owning an automobile in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for your time, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, we leave you tonight with the words of E.B. White. Everything in life is somewhere else and you get there in a car. That's all we have for you tonight. You can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube page, and we value your opinion, so please share your thoughts and feedback with us through email at feedback.adncenglish@derana.lk or via WhatsApp at 076 805 7933. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good night.